My name is Alex Apostle, and I'm the superintendent of the Shelton School District. And I'm honored to be here today to read a story of a great Native American. The morning sun shone brightly. As it climbed in the sky, it warmed the grass in front of Kuikuk Hall on the Haskell Institute campus. This day in mid-January 1900 was warmer than usual in Lawrence, Kansas. It would be a special day at the boarding school for American Indian students. Today, one of the best football teams in the country would visit Haskell. The Carlisle Indian Industrial School team had been riding on trains since Christmas, when it had beaten the best team in the West, the University of California. On a 3-week trip back to Pennsylvania, the Carlisle team stopped at several American Indian boarding schools. Today was Haskell's turn. All the Haskell boys gathered in their uniforms for a dress parade. The girls wore their best dresses and stood huddled together. The crowd buzzed with excitement. The Haskell students came from many different tribes. They spoke dozens of different languages, but they were united in their love for their new sport of football. One short, skinny 12-year-old with dark, wavy hair stood off by himself. He tossed a battered homemade football in the air and caught it. He squinted into the sun as he watched the Carlisle players stride across the lawn to the dining hall. He dreamed of one day playing alongside them. The boy, whose mother called him Wathu Huck, Bright Path in his native Sauk language, also had another name. He was called Jim Thorpe. In just 12 years, Jim's dream would come true. This great-great-grandson of the Sauk warrior Black Hawk would lead the Carlisle football team to one of the greatest victories in sports history. Jim Thorpe loved to hunt and fish, and to ride horses near his home in Indian Territory in what is now Oklahoma. He spent long afternoons running and chasing his dogs along the banks of the Canadian River. But Jim didn't much care for school. He ran away often. He even ran away from Haskell several times. Jim's father, Hiram, finally decided to send him to Carlisle Industrial School when Jim was 16. Maybe there, more than 1,000 miles from home, Jim would settle down and learn a trade. Carlisle had been created by the military in 1879 to educate the children of American Indians. The American government took Native children from their homes and sent them to boarding schools far away. The children were forced to march and to learn trades, like baking or blacksmithing. The schools cut the children's hair and burned their traditional clothes. Teachers would not allow them to speak their languages or to practice their religion, often beating the students for doing so. Like many boys at Carlisle, Jim worked on a nearby farm to earn extra money during the school year. One day, while walking home from work, Jim saw the boys' track team practicing the high jump. Standing there in his overalls and work boots, the scrawny teenager watched the athletes trying to jump over a bar between two posts. The bar was set just over Jim's head, 5 feet, 9 inches above the grass. None of the boys could jump over it without knocking it from its posts. "Can I try?" Jim asked. The other boys laughed at him. "Go ahead," one of them said, looking at his big boots and dusty work clothes. Jim laced up a borrowed pair of track shoes. He trotted up to the bar and jumped. kicking his legs as he had seen the others do. When he landed in the sandpit on the other side, the bar still rested on its post. He had cleared it. Jim picked himself up and brushed off his overalls. He turned to the track team and laughed. Then he returned the shoes and walked away. Later, another boy came to Jim's room. He told him that Glenn, Pop Warner, coach of the Carlisle track and football teams, wanted to see him. Jim walked slowly into Coach Warner's office. Looking down at his own feet, Jim asked, "Have I done anything wrong?" "Son, you've only broken the school record in the high jump," Coach Warner said. "That's all." Pop Warner handed Jim a uniform and said, "I'll see you at practice tomorrow." Jim loved all sports. He was fast. He could jump high and far. He could run all day without getting tired, it seemed. And he was tough. He shined in baseball, lacrosse, track, hockey, and football. Carlisle's varsity football team, one of the best in the country, was known for its speed and cleverness. The Indians ran unusual plays and often fooled their opponents. One time they even hid the football in a player's shirt and he dashed for a touchdown. Jim told Coach Warner he wanted to play for the varsity team. Coach Warner looked the teenager up and down. He knew the boy was a speedy and gifted athlete, but Jim was very small. "Come back and see me when you're bigger," Pop said. Jim was not discouraged. For months he trained and he ran. He also grew. In the fall, Jim again begged Coach Warner to put him on the varsity team. Pop stood on the sidelines as his team practiced. He still thought Jim was too small, but he decided to give him a chance. He tossed him a football and told him to run on the field to give the team some tackling practice. The varsity players roared and ran at Jim. He cut and dodged as bigger players tried to tackle him. He ran the length of the field and into the end zone without being tackled. Jim trotted back to Pop Warner. He smiled as he tossed the football to the coach. Pop was mad. He thought Jim was pretty full of himself. He told him to do it again, and he slammed the football into Jim's middle. So Jim did. Pop Warner knew when he was licked. He added Jim to the varsity team. Jim played football for two seasons before he left school again. And he left Carlisle. He played baseball in North Carolina for a while. When the season was over, he hunted and fished on the Sac and Fox Reservation east of Oklahoma City. He also helped to take care of his brothers and sisters. Life was pretty good. He decided he was done with school. But Pop found him and asked him to come back to Carlisle. He told Jim he would help him train for the 1912 Olympics if he returned. Jim decided to give Carlisle another chance. By 1912, 25-year-old Jim Thorpe was a star of the Carlisle football team. He had been named to the All-American team in 1911. Pop Warner kept his promise and traveled with Jim and the U.S. team to Sweden for the Summer Olympics. On his first day of competition, Jim won 4 of the 5 events in the pentathlon: the long jump, discus throw, 200-meter sprint, and 1,500-meter race. His gold medal in the pentathlon was the first ever won by an American Indian. A week later, Jim competed in the 10 events of the decathlon over 2 days. Before the events of the second day, Jim discovered that someone had stolen his shoes. He found a mismatched pair in a trash can and wore them to compete. One shoe was so big, he had to wear several socks to keep it on his foot as he ran. Even with shoes that didn't fit, Jim won 4 of the 10 decathlon events. Near the end of the second day, he set a record for the 1,500-meter race, running it in 4 minutes, 40.1 seconds. No decathlete would beat that record for 60 years. Jim won his second gold medal and was declared the greatest athlete in the world. Jim and Pop sailed back to the United States and their greatest football season. Because Carlisle was a military base, the school could not charge admission to its games. So Jim's team traveled to colleges all over the country to earn money for the Carlisle program. The home teams paid Carlisle to play because they drew large crowds. Few people in the college towns had ever seen an American Indian. In 1912, the Indians would play the best teams in the country. Their biggest challenge would come from the United States Military Academy at West Point, where future Army officers trained. The two teams had played only once before, back in 1905. Sports writers described the 1912 game as a rematch between Army and Indians who fought on the battlefield just 20 years before. Carlisle came into the game undefeated, with the best offense in the nation, averaging nearly 40 points a game. The West Point Cadets had the best defense and had lost just 1 of 4 games that season. Most people expected the bigger, stronger, better equipped Army team to handle Carlisle easily. Many sports writers thought Army had beaten tougher teams and would prove too much for Jim and his teammates. But Carlisle was playing a new kind of football. The small, quick team did not rely on strength. The players used their speed and their brains to win. They invented plays like end runs and reverses that had never been tried before. Carlisle was one of the first teams to throw a forward pass. And Carlisle had Jim Thorpe, the greatest athlete in the world, as its captain. Thousands of excited fans sat in the stands in the cold, gray late afternoon at West Point. A stiff wind blew out of the northwest as the Carlisle players and their coaches trudged to the visitors' locker room. As they laced up their shoes and held their stiff leather helmets in their laps, the Indian men turned their eyes to Pop Warner. The coach walked between the hard wooden benches. He was not much for speeches, but today Pop was excited. Your fathers and grandfathers are the ones who fought their fathers, he said, gesturing towards the field. These men playing against you today are soldiers. They are the Long Knives. You are Indians. Tonight we will know if you are warriors. It's true that the Army team was made up of future military leaders. In the Army's backfield were 4 future generals, including Dwight Eisenhower. 40 years later, Eisenhower would be elected President of the United States. The Indians had a few new tricks in store for Army. As they lined up for their first play, they did so in a double wing formation. The halfbacks moved up near the line of scrimmage. The defense did not know who might get the snap and what he might do with the ball. Carlisle ran to within yards of the Army end zone several times in the first half, but they couldn't get across the goal line. Army scored the first touchdown but missed the extra point. The score was 6-0, but Army's good fortune would not last. During the third quarter, Jim caught a punt near midfield. Just like the day he ran through the whole Carlisle squad at tackling practice, he zigged and zagged his way up the field. He dashed to the end zone, but a penalty took the touchdown away. Still, Jim and Carlisle had taken over the game. Army threw everything they had at Jim. 2 linebackers double-teamed the great athlete. Their assignment was to stop him, but he proved unstoppable. Jim broke free for several 20-yard runs, scattering tacklers with ease. His long runs and amazing pass receptions set up 4 touchdowns by his teammates, Alex Arcasa and Joe Berge. It was Jim's greatest game as a Carlisle player. When time ran out on the field, the Carlisle Indians shouted and patted each other on the shoulders. They had beaten the Army Cadets 27-6. The team was excited as they boarded the train for home. Although tired and bruised, the players couldn't stop laughing and talking about the game. They agreed the victory over Army was the hardest and best game they had ever played. Quarterback Gus Welch looked at his roommate, Jim Thorpe, and smiled, remembering every hit and tackle. That, he said, was the rattling of the bones.